Welcome to the party, Anna.
Hi, Shannon. How you doing?
Lovely as usual. And then in the next room.
Well, just moment
All
to
right.
moment, we have to keep track of you.
Is there anything you want to start off with before I start hitting you with questions? Speaking of which, thank you to everyone for sending me questions throughout the week.
Yeah, I was impressed with the long list of questions that came in. I think people are definitely picking up on that opportunity. Let's see. Well, we have our pending action before the World Court. Everybody knows that. Everybody doesn't know that we had some losses and technical difficulties that we had to make up. I have not recorded my video yet, but we will be doing that this week. I have until Friday to actually get it to the court. They'll be doing their ruminations over the weekend, next weekend. And then we should have the final result and, all of that stuff taken care of with the summations and everything. So that will be a good thing for everybody. And it's resulting in a strange situation. It's resulting in a strange situation, whereas more countries get their land assets back, they are asset rich and cash poor. And that's because all of the different fiat currencies are being withdrawn from the marketplace and destroyed. And a lot of the, I guess you would call them satellite mints that Obama established by sending printing press and engraving plates and the correct paper and ink and everything over to other countries and letting them just print up as many $100 bills as they wanted. A lot of those operations have been shut down. And so the great influx of Federal Reserve notes that flooded the market during the Obama and Biden administrations is being cut off and cut down. And as a result, you're going to see a lot of situations that compound to make people's natural desire to take cash out of the bank at this time. This whole situation is going to exacerbate it because the banks will have less cash to meet those cash demands. And the FRNs are being slowly withdrawn from the market anyway. So at some point, the banks simply won't have enough cash to meet demand, at which point they have to close their doors. And of course, the banks are dreading that moment. We're also dreading that moment because that means people won't have what they need in their own possession to be able to take care of their day-to-day expenses. And I have to take this for just a second, folks.
Okay, while Donna's taking a break, let me just say thank you once again for all your questions. I've got more than enough to get us through the show tonight. If we do not get to the questions you emailed me, just hold tight. There's always next week. Also, if you want to donate to Anna, use either the Revolut or the TASA website because Cash App is being a pain.
Okay, I'm back. That didn't take too long, did it? Okay, so where was I? I was giving you kind
Banks
of a
not
run.
having the money for transactions.
Yeah, the banks aren't having the monies for transactions, so they're not happy. And we have to have a cash replacement because otherwise we're totally dependent on some kind of a digital system. And as we've already seen, a digital system, if it's in the wrong hands, can be used to politically target individuals and businesses and create all sorts of nasty unpleasantness. So we don't want to have a system that is totally dependent on just one source, like the QFS system. You've all heard about the QFS system. You can't allow those sorts of things to become monopolized, because if you do, you're handing over your freedom. You're handing over, you're making yourself into a very vulnerable individual. And so we don't want that. We want to have multiple monetary systems, multiple financial systems, and multiple cash resources, national currencies. And yes, we'd like to have a universal currency also, not to replace national currencies or to restrict your choices, but to add a choice to the table, which is a whole different matter. So what we're focused on is a banking system that is that offers you lots of different services, lots of different systems, and where you're not dependent on any one digital system, and where you also have actual cash and coinage that you can have and possess and use for your own purposes. So ultimately, we're building back better, as the saying goes, to have a better, I won't say more competitive, because all of these systems are free, but perhaps more competitive in terms of the level of service delivery, the variety of different services available, the familiarity or access to specific world markets. You know, there are a lot of different ways in which we can have healthy monetary systems and healthy service sectors within the financial markets. And we just have to put our minds to it and make it so. Otherwise, you know, the natural bent of the corporatist mindset is to beat the competitor, beat the competitor, beat the competitor, and ultimately establish a monopoly that then is used coercively to, instead of serve their customers, to control their customers. And we do not want that. We've come close enough to that with the Federal Reserve System, and we don't want any more of it. I just had to explain that again this afternoon to a powerful and influential group of people who thought, oh, well, now here's our opportunity to do our version of a central bank system. No, we're done with central banking because central banks have not performed. Central banks have been a disaster. And as I've explained before, the purpose of a central bank is basically illegal to begin with. Central banks were originally created to rig commodities, and not just money commodities, all commodities. They started out as means to control import of coffee to the Kingdom of Prussia. Okay, so central banks have been used for a long time to control commodities, to manipulate commodity markets. And money is just one of the different commodities that the central banks rig. They also rig credit. And so you've got this essentially criminal organization involved in commodity rigging, right smack dab in the center of your economy, if you allow central banks to take over and do what central banks do. And of course, their excuse is always that they're going to prevent things like bank runs and instability in the market and so on and so forth. But what they actually do is they create criminality. And once that criminality gets started, you find that they also create bank runs and they also create market instability, but they do it to enhance their own profits. And so you see situations like the great bank runs of the early 1900s were all caused by central banks. They were not moderated by central banks. They were caused by central banks. And then the central banks walked in and said, oh, we're the solution, right? And then, of course, you had a long roster of failures on the part of central banks to do what they promised to do and failed to deliver on the exact reasons that people allowed them to exist anyway. So goodbye to the central banks. They're a coercive criminal organization that is right smack dab in the middle of the current financial system. And a lot of the problems that the current financial system has would not exist if not for the central banks. So let's just be very honest about the fact that central banks are criminal organizations that are engaged in commodity rigging, And the primary commodity they rig is either money or credit or both. But they also get in there and they rig other things. They rig silver and gold. They rig spices. They rig oil. They rig basic commodities, things like, cotton and fat sow bellies and anything that you can trade on any kind of mercantile exchange. The central banks will be happily rigging it away and making sure that that they're in control of your life and what you're actually having to pay as the price of beans in China. And this is not something that anyone benefits from, really. They say that they control the market in order to stabilize the market, but there's nothing that they do that couldn't be, there's nothing beneficial that they do that couldn't be provided by some good planning and some careful communication and interaction with commodity producers. Okay. Another thing is that you'll find all sorts of different organizations out there wanting you to register. Remember, as you get your assets back, you don't want to register them with anybody. They're yours now. It's been a long, hard battle to get your assets back into your hands. So don't fall into the trap of registering anything that you don't want to give away to someone else or something else. Registration implies that whatever it is, you're giving up your ownership in that item or that right or whatever to some other organization or entity. Okay. So don't get caught in that trap again, and be very careful. Now, there are a few instances where you might want to register something. I can't think of what they might be right off the top of my head. It is not beyond the realm of possibility that you might want to give up an ownership interest in something, but I can't imagine easily what kind of circumstance that would be. Be careful. You are at this point very wealthy. You don't realize it yet, but you're very, very wealthy, and you will continue to gain in wealth, at least in terms of your asset pool and your credit pool. So right now we've managed to recoup part of one category of your assets. So maybe 1/10 of your assets. And that is already more than sufficient to meet all the economic and financial needs that you could ever possibly have for generations. So that gives you some kind of an idea of just how much wealth the world represents. And this includes not only your private wealth, assets that actually are your personal assets, your life, your body, your soul, your energy, your talents, all of that is huge, that you are supposed to own and control, okay? But your house, your land, your physical possessions, your gold, your silver, your credit, all of these things are your personal possessions, right? Then you also have public possessions that you have a share in. So you not only have your private wealth, you also have your public wealth. And that includes all the things that are community resources and community property, roads, streetlights, power plants, libraries, public hospitals, all the different infrastructure, and also any public lands that are set aside for public use or which simply haven't been sold to private interests. All of that is part of your wealth. You have both public and private assets, and they represent two separate categories of wealth, and you all have your own share of everything. Okay, so just sitting here this evening, we're not sitting here any longer as paupers and dependents. We're sitting here as owners and as, I guess you could say, possessors is the correct word, of actual material wealth and actual credit wealth, both public and private. That's quite staggering. So start thinking of yourself a little differently than you ever have, and also see through the little game that they've been playing, by which you wind up owing them for a roster of services or for the use of some of their intellectual property, like the name of the street and the number on the street that they attach to the public road easement. They charge you property taxes for the use of their made-up name and number and things of this sort. And then they basically are charging you for their services and saying that you're a debtor and ignoring the fact that they owe you vast, vast, vast amounts of money. And all that's about to change. All of that is going to get brought forward into the cognizance of everyone on Earth, if it hasn't been already, and you will get a chance to see just how they've worked this scheme to coercively control the vast mass of people on Earth, and have basically treated us like farm animals that were here for their enrichment and to be used and basically farmed. I guess that's the best word for it. Anyway, don't let any more of these characters catch up to you. Be very forthright about it, say it right to their faces, look them in the eye, and don't be afraid, because this has to come to an end. They have to be stood down. And the only way that they can be stood down is by you becoming educated and by you having the courage to stand up and maintain your own position. Because if they could steal from you with a show of color of law authority, then they will. And they have. They've done that very successfully for over 100 years. They've just been stealing, embezzling, siphoning, whatever you want to call it. They've been unjustly enriching themselves and using coercive commercial tactics against you when they're supposed to be protecting your persons and providing you good faith service, which they obviously haven't. Now, that doesn't mean that they're aware that they haven't been doing their jobs. That doesn't mean that they're aware that they are committing crimes against you every day. But this has to be brought to their attention. They have to be provided not just notice, but explanation and education to bring them forward so that they can more clearly see what they're doing and why it's wrong and why their operations require correction. So all of this is kind of going on at the same time. Some of you may have heard already and may be disturbed by the news that 600,000 truckers have basically been furloughed. That's 600,000 families that rely upon the income from Teamster type jobs all over the country. That's a huge hit, and it is indicative of what happens when the situation with the money supply is extremely contracted as it is now. What happens is that sales fall off, people start being scared and hoarding and not spending money. That's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is what I've told you about the money supply contracting, and so then that also limits spending and investment. And then the orders drop off, not just here, but in China and Japan and all around the world. The new orders drop off, and then the manufacturing slows down because the manufacturers don't have that magic pre-order in their hand, right? They don't have that demand that they can rely on. So then they cut back on their suppliers and turtle down and get frightened. And then the supply chains begin to break down because the truckers aren't needed to move goods to market if the goods aren't being ordered and paid for and the whole thing starts to just collapse. And yes, indeed, you're beginning to see signs of um, a supply chain breakdown in the form of reduced factory orders, which then translates as reduced shipping orders. And you then see truckers out of work. You see, to some extent, a resurgence of railroad traffic because for the transport that remains, then the railroads get pulled back into action to a greater degree as fewer and fewer truck routes are being serviced adequately. Then you wind up with a resurgence of rail service demand. But remember that rail service demand can never do what truck service does. It cannot do the sort of pinpoint accuracy and delivery to the end line receiver that trucking can do. I was just barely enabled to see the tail end of railroad service, passenger service, and freight service to my small hometown in Wisconsin. And I can tell you that the trains brought in the big stuff, the really big orders of lumber and heavy equipment and things of that nature. But everything else was brought in by trucks. And the trucks were much more mobile. They were relatively cheap to operate, and they could deliver with pinpoint accuracy exactly wherever the goods were needed. And except for those very large, bulky items, they were cost efficient. So now you're going to see all of this kind of devolution in the delivery and supply chain that's actually being driven by unemployment, that's being driven by changes in the way that businesses are being operated, the choices and policies that large businesses are making. I think I'm sure that you've all seen where some of these big box store operations have been robotized, and they've got all of these automated systems that are taking over from human workers. And as a result, I just saw it in the headlines this past week, was something like 100,000 Amazon.com workers were laid off because robots had taken their jobs. This is not that much different in some respects than the sorts of losses that workers have seen with the move of many industries to China during the Reagan administration and afterward, when different corporate interests saw their opportunity to take advantage of quote unquote Chinese slave labor that would reduce the cost of their products in the marketplace, and which would mean that they moved their factory facilities to China, which they did in vast numbers. Now what we see is that America has very little industrial base left and has to rebuild its industrial base. It has to bring manufacturing facilities back online. It has to tear down old ones and rebuild new ones. And all of this at a time when the monetary and financial system is in chaos and wreckage. And so what do? Everybody is going, it's blood in the streets, people, coming near to desperation, and it's only going to get worse because the central banks and their commodity rigging mechanisms are inevitably going to fail. And we're already seeing that with the LIBOR scandal, and we are seeing similar scandals with rigging silver in the marketplace. And all this stuff is going to ultimately lead to another stock market crash. If the central banks weren't already manipulating the stock markets, and if the stock markets were not already manipulating themselves by buying back stock interest in their own corporations, we would have already seen a crash. What's actually happening, a lot of people, now this isn't 100%, there are actually some market sectors that are growing, and there are actually some some individual corporations that are in boom times right now, but they're pretty few and far between. What you're more likely and more often seeing is that established corporations are buying back their own stock and promoting their own stock splits to make it appear that there's demand that isn't really there. And so there's a lot of funny business going on in the stock markets. And sooner or later, all of that wears thin and you have a stock market crash. So please, if you have limited funds, if you are, just a small day trader or someone who's investing 5,000, 10,000, a few $1,000 that you can't afford to lose, don't dabble in the stock market now. Many people were encouraged in the 1920s to get involved in the stock market as a way to leverage poor performance for savings accounts. They could only, and then as now, only get a couple percentage in interest on their savings or other deposits, even CDs. And so they were looking at opportunities to make a little extra with what little money they had extra. And so you had millions of Americans who invested in the stock market, and they were not aware that the stock market was rigged, and they were not aware that the banks were doing these manipulations behind the scenes, along with some of the larger corporations, which themselves had been taken over, had been unlawfully converted, and were under government control. And so nobody was expecting the big crash of 1929. And yet, if you were aware of what was actually going on in terms of the increase in government ownership of major corporations and major industrial sectors, and you were aware of the result of the 1907 and World War I debacle, then it was predictable that in 1929 there would have been a stock market crash attendant to the settlement of the bankruptcy that started in 1907 and which then created the First World War. And then we had the economic boom caused by the war coming to roost 10 years later. So anyway, all of this is cyclic, all of it's predictable, all of it's been planned and orchestrated down to the gnat's eyelashes by the central banks. And they don't care about small investors. They just care about themselves and their cronies. And so even though it may be extremely, it may look like a good, exciting thing, do not leverage anything in the stock market. Don't invest anything in the stock market that you can't afford to lose. This is Grandma's best advice, and I hope you take it, because we don't need anybody feeling desperate because they lost their nest egg in the stock market. There are other things that you can put your money in that are going to prove to be a better investment in terms of your health and your wealth than the stock market right now. And so just a friendly little Dutch grandma talk here for those of you who are looking for some place to put a little extra money where you can expect to see some sort of return on it. And when we're talking about returns, I guess I just want to say that there are two kinds of returns. There are monetary returns and there are material returns. And there are times in your life when it's better to have material returns instead of cash returns. And what do I mean by that? It's something that you have to think of a little bit like an opportunity cost. If there's something that you could do and would do and otherwise should do, and you're simply prevented from doing that because at a given moment you didn't have the funds or your funds were tied up, which is the more common circumstance, then you have an opportunity cost. Well, you are looking at a situation where there are a lot of opportunity costs no matter what you do. It's very difficult to tell, where's the crystal ball that's going to tell me exactly when will the stock market crash and to how hard a crash will it be, right? um, there's no way to tell. But there are other things that you do know that are investments that you can reasonably make that will bear very certain and very material advantages that the uncertainties of the stock market pale in comparison to the benefit that you can actually receive by investing in other kinds of things for other kinds of gains. Um, for example, a young woman had a choice between investing in the stock market and getting her teeth fixed. She got her teeth fixed. She'll be able to, you know, have better health and be stronger and have that benefit locked in because she invested in her health and her long-term ability to digest her food better and to look better and feel better and avoid pain from decayed teeth. I mean, that's an investment that she made in herself going forward that no matter what will pay dividends. It will pay dividends in improved life and health, but it will also provide dividends in that she won't have to worry about, ongoing dental costs that would have been created if she hadn't taken care of her teeth. So there are a lot of things that you can invest in. You can invest in your child's education. You can invest in your home. You can invest in tools that you can then use to provide yourself and your family with other sorts of benefits and income. There are a lot of things that you can do that you might not necessarily be acclimated toward. But this is the time to be creative in your thinking in terms of what you should invest in. And certainly I would suggest that you invest just a little bit in your government because ultimately, as we, well, this past week we issued a little graphic that showed the American government on the top and the United States government on the bottom. And you can now see that there are two parts of the American government still functioning and only one part of the United States government still functioning. And if you read the article today, you will further realize that the American government has managed to cover the soil jurisdiction, the land and the sea jurisdiction, and by chartering the global commercial banks, the global family commercial banks, both the Global Family Bank of Commerce and the Global Family Commercial Bank, we have managed to cover our commercial sector, our air jurisdiction. So even though that is not the absolute and only answer to our need for a means to conduct commerce, we successfully did this. And so we now have a full roster of government jurisdiction as opposed to the United States government, which has only one subcontractor still functioning. And that subcontractor is under a lot of pressure and has limited resources and is really feeling the pinch and is not actually interacting with us appropriately. Okay. They're still trying to basically commandeer all power unto themselves and to quote unquote represent us instead of listening to us as the civilian government. And they're still interfering with our ability to access and deploy assets that legitimately and only belong to us. So that not only leaves us poor and in a situation of need, it also leaves them poor and in a situation of need, because as long as they are standing between us and our assets and our credit, so that they can act as middlemen and seek a coercive control over our assets and our credit, they are prolonging their own misery because then we cannot help them. And that still hasn't gotten through their rather thick heads yet, that they are digging their own grave, that they are creating their own problem, by not recognizing the actual civilian government, which is the American government. And also, they haven't realized, apparently, that the municipal government that they were using as their civilian government is not going to come back and rescue them. So they are in a situation where they need to wake up, realize what their real role is, and seek the assistance and the, I guess you could say, the forgiveness of the actual civilian government that is the government of this country. They have a contract to provide services. It's called the Constitution of the United States of America. We wish that they would simply observe their contract and do their duty in good faith, and then let us do our job. Let us do what we are supposed to do and handle our own assets, our own credit, and pay them for their services. It's a very simple relationship. Our quid pro quo with our federal subcontractors is plainly stated in 3 different federal constitutions, one for each vendor. And there really should not be any question or doubt or problem whatsoever with the administration of those contracts. And there wouldn't be if they were operating the way they should be, and if they were being honest with the American people about the circumstance that evolved out of the quote unquote American Civil War. The other thing I want you all to really zone in on and be aware of and know is that the American Civil War was not a war. It was a mercenary conflict. It was illegal. It's still illegal. And it was illegal because it was never declared by any Congress and because no peace treaty ever ended it. So you will hear from time to time members of the military trying to cite the law of war, and they will try to say that they were occupying this country as a victorious military, and that's not true. It's simply not true. Lincoln converted our honorable military into a mercenary force, and they've been a mercenary force ever since. Now we are moving to rectify that and to return it to status as a true national military force. But in terms of the arguments that go on, we were bamboozled, okay? We were not given the information necessary, and we were actually actively prevented from taking appropriate action because our Federation officers who had never participated in the Civil War, were not combatants, were after the fact accused of being rebels and were hunted and harassed and killed and ambushed and had their homes and their farms seized and burned and everything else. We suffered a government putsch in which the government subcontractors took over the government and got rid of the American government as much as they possibly could, even the memory of the American government. They've erased it from the textbooks. And so you wind up with this situation where we were the victims of a government regime change at the hands of our own employees. And that's what's actually happened. And we need to understand that, and we need to object to it, and we need to hold them accountable for it in terms of what they do now. They're not responsible for what Abraham Lincoln pulled. They're not responsible for the deceitful way that the state organizations enrolled soldiers in the Civil War. There's so much that they are not responsible for because they simply inherited it. They inherited it blind. They did not know the origin of the situation. And most of them just came in and did whatever their predecessor did. Okay, so we're not here to blame the military. We're not here to blame anybody, really. The people that are responsible are long since dead and gone. Our responsibility, however, is to the present and to the future. And we have to be very clear that things have not been done the way they should have been done, that it's resulted in harm to the people of this country and to the country's resources, and that we have to do something different, and even radically different in some respects. So I think that the important part that we all have to zone in on is what is freedom? And you need to think about this a little bit more deeply than you've ever thought about it. I can pretty much guarantee. Because you cannot be free if you're economically enslaved. You cannot possibly be free if you're living in fear of government officials sending SWAT teams to your door to seize your money and your property. You cannot be free if you are being constantly tagged, analyzed, and data mined by government corporations. You cannot be free if you are dependent on the government for any good or service that you could not competitively either provide yourself or select among other service providers on a regular basis. So these are a lot of issues for people to keep rolling around in the back of their mind. That, okay, what does it really mean to be free? Well, you have to have a degree of economic freedom to say that you are free. You have to have a degree of asset ownership to be able to say that you are free. You have to have freedom to act, to choose, and most importantly, to think for yourself. Because if you can't think for yourself, you are well and truly enslaved. And unfortunately, the path that has been pursued in this world for the last 100 years has been toward programming the human mind. They have deliberately set up situations where from a very early age, we're told who we are, what we are, and how we have to act, and what kinds of prejudices we need to have. We're told that all Russians are bad and all Chinese are sneaky. We're told that blacks are lazy and whites are prejudiced bastards. We're told that we're part of a group, that we have an ethnicity, that we have a sex, that we have a color, that we have a kind, that we have a religion, that we have a political party, a credit rating, and on and on and on and on and on. All these so-called identity factors have been heaped on us. And for the most part, as young people, we've accepted all of this coming at us because, well, we trust our parents, we trust our school teachers, these are the people that are our families and our teachers and our friends, right? But they're victims too. They're being swallowed up into this crisis, this mental programming, every bit as much as we are. And we need to realize that we are being indoctrinated and programmed as far as defining who we are, what we ought to like, what we ought not to like, what we should give our energy and attention to, and what should be disregarded. All of these things are being programmed by television, by news feeds, by radio, by peer groups, okay? The peer group is a new invention. 100 years ago, we did not have peer groups in this country, and they created peer groups by radically transforming the model of education and grouping children in these unnatural classroom settings with other kids that just happen to be the same age. Okay, so all of these things, these changes, have been made with a goal to basically rob you of your own mind, to rob you of your own ability to think, and to rob you of your ability to define yourself and what's important to you as an individual. And this is done in part so that they can control you more readily, but also so that they can guarantee election results, so that they can get you to fight in military situations where it's not to your advantage or not to your country's advantage, but which is to the advantage of certain warmongers and profiteers. They do this also primarily to encourage consumerism. They want you to buy, to buy, to buy, to buy, to buy, and to want all sorts of things that you can't have because they are priced out of your price range, and that keeps you working harder and harder and harder trying to get that new Lexus or to get your wife that new 10-bedroom house that she wants on a cliff overlooking the sea, and so on and so on and so forth. And really, there is no consideration of what you really, as an individual, want or need. And they do all of this by catching our attention. Your attention is one of your primary assets. And when they capture your attention and turn your attention towards something that's useless or something that is something you can't do anything about, something that makes you fearful, something that makes you take up some sort of position, then they're successful. And you see a lot of this in the news feeds and things that you see coming over your desk every day. They are manipulating your thought processes and your beliefs, and they're conditioning you to put up with a lot of things that you don't need to put up with. And they're also conditioning you to accept lies, which you can readily observe to be lies. And the more aware you become of what is being fed to you, the better. And that's why I'm always talking about your Shinola sensor. Now, when someone tells you you need a brand new Lexus, or that you're going to be ever so much happier with the Lincoln Continental, then you need to step back and think, since when do I need a Lexus? Why would I need a Lexus? Is there any real advantage to having a Lexus? You need to start thinking for yourself again, maybe for the first time ever. I know people who have never really learned to think analytically. They literally cannot start out with a premise, you need a Lexus, and analyze that in terms of their own needs and wants. We have 3 generations that have a real problem because they have not been taught any form of analytic thinking in the course of their education. And that's a problem. It's great for all the social engineers because it makes the population malleable. It makes them stupid in a way because they can be just led around like bulls with a ring in their nose. But we, as individuals, as families, as communities, as states, and as governments, cannot afford this kind of social engineering that is basically a form of brainwashing and propaganda that is being employed to turn people into relatively mindless and complacent little recipients of whatever the masters want to foist off on them. Like climate change. This is a good example. Why do the masters want climate change? It gives them an excuse to enforce and create an absolutely ugly tax. A tax system. They're after a tax system, some way to tax the people, some sort of narrative that they can use as an excuse to tax people. And actually, it's ridiculous from a scientific standpoint. It's always been ridiculous from a scientific standpoint, and it still is ridiculous if you are buying into the human-caused climate change narrative. Because even though we observe that there are indeed changes in the climate, the part that human beings and their farting cows play in this is absolutely trivial. And we know that. We know that a single active volcano in a matter of a few days can spew out more carbon dioxide than humans have contributed to the atmosphere since the dawn of humans in history. We know that for a fact. Scientists and geologists, by the dozens, if not the hundreds and thousands, know that for a fact. And yet we've been treated to 20 years of climate change extremism and all this hyperbole and all of this, all these completely reckless statements about the harm that humans and their animals are doing to the environment by, creating carbon dioxide, which just happens to be what plants need to live. Now think about that. If we were all thinking, if we were listening to this for more than 5 minutes, then the majority of the room, 90% of it at least, should have stood up and walked out the door. But people aren't thinking for themselves anymore. They're accepting whatever authorities tell them. And as a result, we've had to go through this entire climate change hysteria. And we've had to listen to the new green crap. And we have had to sit here, those of us with a brain who are still able to think for ourselves, have very quickly and correctly deduced this is nothing but another excuse for another big tax system. So, there is value in learning to think for yourself by preserving your ability to think for yourself and by enforcing your ability to think for yourself every single day. And I cannot possibly encourage everyone enough to do so. Well, you may sit there and go, well, how do I do that? Well, number one, learn to take everything that the media presents with a big grain of salt. And learn to do your own research when you have a question in your mind about what they're telling you. Okay, look around at the world around you. Everybody's always telling you, oh, well, you see all these things nobody else sees. Why do I see them? Well, number one, because I have dedicated my life to the truth. And when you dedicate your life to the truth, you see the lies. Okay, so that's number one. Number two, I'm not lazy. If I have a question, I will go ferret out an answer, and I will keep searching until I have an answer that makes sense to me. It may not be the ultimate right answer, but at least I will keep an open mind and I will keep looking. Okay, so keep your eyes open. Keep your ears open, down to the ground, you know? And that way you'll never go wrong. And you'll always have at least a good basis for your opinions. You won't be just parroting what somebody else said, and you won't be standing there stymied by 25 Harvard professors who've all been paid off to come up with some particular line, some narrative, some story. Okay? It does not matter how many people have how many degrees. We have totally respected too many people based on their ability to vomit back the supposedly correct answer on a test. And we have not given enough credence to those who are living in the practical real world and who have to have actual experience dealing with life. So remember that Tesla, one of the greatest geniuses of all time, had no degree. He had no college degree at all. He was a high school boy from Serbia. Think about that. Many of our greatest geniuses did not have advanced degrees. They were just geniuses on their own right because of their own interests and their own talents. So genius is not something that a college education can provide you. And we should not be overly overwhelmed with respect just because someone has a degree. Unfortunately, our entire society has taught us to deeply respect education. And it's more important to respect intelligence and practical experience, right up there with education. Anyway, enough of my soapbox for that particular irritating part of our cultural milieu. We have a situation here where each one of us has to rise above a certain amount of the shinola that we've been fed, the indoctrination we've received, and to become much more critical in our thinking. And so we are at the beginning of the crux of the matter, as I would call it. Those of us who have been working long and hard have our ducks in a row. We are prepared to go forward. We know what needs to be done. And now it's just a matter of convincing our employees that, yes, we do know what needs to be done. And yes, we should be trusted with our own assets. Thank you. We don't need your help. And yes, it's time to move in order to save lives and to preserve what gains have been made in the past 100 years in terms of technology and the quality of life on the planet. So you can count on me and the rest of the Federation and all of our associated friends and people that have worked so long and so hard to be ready to assist and to have a safety net in place for you. We are not giving up and we're not slowing down. So please be aware that we are facing some resistance on the part of those who claim to represent us. And I remain very, what would I call it? I believe that life wins over death. I believe that people are more important than corporations. And I believe that we will succeed and that this great transition, which has been advertised as a gigantic cataclysmic collapse, does not have to be any kind of huge collapse. Bumps, yes. Some hard times, yes. A rethinking of our arrogance, yes. We need to turn backward a little bit. We need to appreciate skills that our forefathers had that we no longer have. We need to readjust our thinking away from media and entertainment and computers and on all of this, and find another portion for practical skills. And so, yes, there's a change coming, but it's a good change. And those of us who are committed to making a change that is beneficial to life on this planet, which is rooted in truth, and which will form a good, stable basis for humanity going forward, have come too long and too far to give up. And so I'm inviting each and every one of you to make that same kind of commitment and to be of good cheer, as the family motto goes, or one of the family mottos goes. The Bell Shares, among other things that have come up in the annals of history, are men of good cheer. So in spite of all of the difficulties and the lies and the propaganda and indoctrination and all of the things that we've had to go through, be of good cheer, because there are good people in the world and there is a divine providence and we are not giving up. So as someone once said, it's never over till it's over. And we're in that getting it over stage, wherein the people win and the corporations lose. So I guess that's all I had to say for tonight. It's for my part. Can we take a few questions, Shannon?
Absolutely. We've got more than a few of them. Hold on, let me pull up the best, the more applicable ones to your statements tonight. As I said before, if we don't get to your questions tonight, there's always next week. Okay, we got somebody asking, is Anna saying that the surviving de facto government is presenting the rollout of the GFB?
I'm saying that the established United States government that's operating under delegate powers there's only a third of it left. And that third is having a hard time coming to grips with the history and its role and everything.
Okay, do you have any more information on your court case and the de facto being broke?
The de facto is broke. I mean, 2/3 of the de facto is broke and the other third is almost broke. So
And how does your case affect the World Court? How will your case with the World Court affect things?
my case with the World Court, or I should say our case with the World Court, simply gets the land assets back in the position of the people instead of the corporations that are pretending to represent the people.
Okay. Next question. On Terra Australis, can we use the International Notarial Witness Recording Secretary instead of a public notary to witness the package of reconveyance documents, even if we do not have an elected seated assembly yet?
You'd be better off simply going through the Global Family Bank land registration and our land recording and publishing service. You don't even have to worry about public notaries in that system. You have your witnesses and they stand instead of the notary. A notary is worth two witnesses. So if you have two witnesses, which is the standard, you in essence have a notary.
Okay. Next, we have someone on the land and soil of California. If someone is married, but their spouse does not want to correct their status, but the other one does, how would they go about the process? And what does that mean for their governmental marriage?
Unless they are filing joint tax returns and having property in joint ownership, it doesn't have anything much to do with the other spouse. If they do have, say, a joint business or something of that sort, you may want to split it 50-50 or come to some agreement where one partner owns it and the other one doesn't. However, at this point, I think that it's very important for people in this situation to do their best to educate their spouse, because there are very significant advantages to being on the land and soil as opposed to being at sea. Not the least of which is the instability that the sea jurisdiction is undergoing and all of the repercussions of the criminality of what's gone on in the sea jurisdiction. You could be looking at having to pay debts and being bankrupted and having your own business bankrupted for things that you aren't even aware of. And so I think it's very important for couples that are in this situation to take a very good, hard, long look and to educate your spouse as much as you can.
All right, next question. Could you please expand on and explain a little bit more about the 120-day requirement for government shutdown? When did the 120 days start, and when should we expect it to end? Will the GFG account be open prior to this end date?
Well, strange to tell you, I don't know specifically the day that it began or the day it will end. I haven't followed along that closely. I just know that there's this, basically 3.5, 4 month period at the end of these bankruptcies where the government shuts down and they vacate Washington, D.C. And the whole thing is they try to cover it up with all sorts of different things, but it always happens. And it's happened repeatedly. The people who have lived in Washington, D.C. all of their lives can recall this. They can sit there and talk about, well, when it shut down in 2000, and they will tell you specific times when this same phenomenon has happened. And so it's happening now. The bankruptcy began, I believe, in September of 2015. And so again, the time period rollout for the 10 years of the bankruptcy, again, we're hitting around September, October, November, December. You could be looking at January 1st, say, being the end of the whole bankruptcy proceedings. Now, there are some people and some organizations that are trying to delay settlement. And from what I've seen, they are even making their brags that they can delay settlement and cause all this pain and hurt and disruption and chaos for their own power and their own benefit. And I say, bourgeois. We have it within our grasp to float our own boat and do our own thing, and we should do that no matter what. It's the difference between central banking and decentralized banking. And we are more than competent to provide for decentralized banking for everybody on Earth. And we can and we should and we must put an end to the criminality that central banking has brought into the financial systems.
Okay. The next question. My home was deeded to the county 2 years ago for non-payment of property taxes. I fended them off with Doug Minnick's help. Yay, Doug. The county just had an annual property sale and mine wasn't included. What's the best way to get my deed back and maybe reimbursement on some property taxes?
That's coming, and it's coming fast. So kind of hold on to your hat and watch what happens here. Those of you who have been defrauded, evicted, harassed, uh, had your property illegally confiscated will be in position to get your property back. Bear in mind that other people may have been harmed by this, people that invested in, who bought your property thinking that they were buying something properly and they weren't. So try to do what you can to hold them harmless, because there are innocent buyers, although I do not, and we do not, our form of law does not recognize any special provision for quote unquote innocent buyers. They are basically given a 30-day notice and maybe some follow-up explanations and that sort of thing, some assistance to find other accommodations and to move on. We are forcing the organizations that are responsible for this to pay up and to help pay for relocation costs for people that bought in good faith and are now being displaced. But a lot of those are incorporated entities and they go bankrupt. And then there's more nastiness involved in going after the shareholders. And, the whole thing is very unfortunate, but you do stand to get your land and your homes back. And you do stand to get any kind of damages if your property has been damaged and any extra expenses and damages that you suffered. So do get your records together. Stand ready to go, because when it goes, it's going to go fast. We will probably bring in elements of the armed forces, in particular the Army and the Army Provost Marshal, to arrest members of these organizations that have participated in the illegal commandeering and confiscation of American assets. These quote unquote civilian military officials and their departments, once they've been given a good solid notice and explanation of this, they become liable. And so you may see some actions in which the Army Provost Marshal is coming and actually arresting, say, your governor or members of the court system. And the reason that this is the way it is that these people have been acting as part of the civilian military, another one of their favorite oxymorons. And as such, they are officers and they are subject to military law and discipline. And so when they illegally confiscate civilian assets, that's against the law. And that's why the Provost Marshal, the head MP, comes and actually arrests them and puts them on trial for it.
Okay, one last question before we call it for tonight. Can the GFG accounts be leaned against or confiscated by the courts?
No, they aren't our courts. They have no jurisdiction. They have no jurisdiction whatsoever related to us. And this is one of the fundamental facts that's being prosecuted and now enforced, is that they never had any right to misaddress us. They never had any right to confiscate us, tax us, or any of this nonsense.
All right. Well, you set the deadline for 6 and we made it to 6:17, so it's about time to sign off. Maybe next week we'll start with questions and then let you end with your rant.
I just had to get my grandma rant in there. All right, well, thank you guys. Good luck. We're going to do well. This is going to be an eventful week. We'll be right on top of it all week. Take care now.